Hello, and thank you for joining the JUKE Multi-Cloud webcast.
In terms of an agenda, I'd like to cover a couple different things. We have a couple slides for those of you that are not familiar or haven't heard of JUKE before, some really high-level slides that kind of talk about what the platform does. We're going to spend some time after that going over a quick demo of the platform. And I hope to show you guys, the value of using an infrastructure, a container infrastructure platform like ours. And then we're going to leave about 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A. And so for those of you that have some questions, I'll make sure to leave some time, and we'll kind of go over those as best as we can. And if we go a little bit over our 2 o'clock stop time, we'll be super flexible with you guys. We want to make sure that you guys have all the questions answered that you might have. So first and foremost, I really want to level set and really talk about not only what JUKE can do, but really where we are in terms of infrastructure and how the applications, the way that they're being deployed today, really have affected the way we actually provide infrastructure. So here on this first slide, we really start with client server. This is like the last century. Then we get into like virtualized hardware and operating systems. So this is traditional virtual machines, your VMware environments, etc. And then we start to see probably around 10 years ago the kind of explosion into the cloud. And we think as organizations continue to deploy applications in the cloud, they're going to be met with certain challenges that are generally defined by the enterprise. Application availability, the ability to replicate those applications, making the containers themselves stateful and protected. And this is where we see a lot of companies really trying to invest in this multi-cloud. And this is where we think JUKE really makes a huge impact. So really high level in terms of the concepts that allow JUKE to really deliver its value proposition is really starting with the fact that the JUKE platform is built on a persistent network fabric. So when we deploy JUKE in the on-prem data center, we're essentially building this fabric that can stretch out into the various cloud providers. Now today we support AWS, GCP, as well as Azure. And we've got templates or images available in each one of those cloud platforms that allow you to extend the JUKE platform into those clouds. On top of this, or I guess based on this presentation, built into this is a persistent storage fabric as well. So what we do on top of all this stretched network fabric is we attach every single one of the attached storage devices on-prem, in the cloud, and we stitch together a global file system. So with this file system, we can consume resources from individual clouds. We can scale in various clouds depending on where you need the resources. And then on top of that persistent stretched network fabric, we present all the compute resources on the same layer 2 overlay. So the key here is that organizations can really begin tooling their application orchestration using a single set of masters, whether you're using Kubernetes or OpenShift, Docker Swarm. We've got some basic built-in orchestration within the JUKE platform, but the total kind of aggregate of all the hosts that are being managed, all the worker nodes, for instance, can be spread across the various clouds. And JUKE will abstract those for you so that you don't have to worry about creating specific VPC connections into a cloud, creating individual disparate clusters in each one of the clouds. And with that, we really believe that the real benefit is deploying not only applications across clouds, but providing a persistent not only networking configuration, but also storage services that allow you to migrate containers, stateful containers between cloud platforms, or even protect stateful applications that are built in containers, so that if a cloud gets interrupted, you can simply redeploy the containers. The persistent volumes would be replicated to the surviving cloud platforms, reattach them, and then bring your applications back up. So in just a quick kind of 4-minute blurb, that's exactly what JUKE does. So let me stop this, and then we're going to get into a demo here. I'll show you what our interface looks like, and then we'll take a look at kind of how it looks in practice. Give me a second here. I'm going to share our web browser. So we'll wait for a thumbs up, see if our web browser is being broadcast. Okay, looks like it is. So this is the JUKE web interface. Now, I will caveat some of the things that we're going to talk about. Everything that's built into the JUKE platform in terms of operations, features, analytics, instrumentation, all of it is built in first via an API, and then the UI will access those APIs through the front end. So let's see here. Let's log in like somebody would want to log in. And this is our dashboard. So really quickly, just to cover the components in the dashboard, we've got CPU, memory, and storage. Now, these are all of the compute and storage resources that are attached to the JUKE network as well as the storage fabric. And you'll notice that we actually categorize each of those components, whether they're, we label whether or not they're local infrastructure or they're in the cloud. So here you can see CPUs divided. We've got 16 local CPUs. We've got 4 cloud CPUs. Now, the cloud CPUs are going to be essentially like in AWS, they'd be EC2 instances, virtual machines in either Azure or GCP. Memory is the same thing, and storage would obviously be made up of cloud volumes as well as locally attached storage in the data center. Workloads, nodes, and networks. So workloads would be the actual containers that have been deployed onto the fabric. The nodes would be the total number of nodes that make up the JUKE cluster. And then networks is a function of all of the layer 2 networks that are built into the fabric. So for instance, if you were doing multi-tenancy, you could create a VLAN for a specific application or a specific tenant. Maybe you've got some developers that just need a subnet to play around in. You can certainly build that into JUKE, deploy that, and then they can attach your containers directly to that. Now, if I want to take a deeper dive and really show you some of the power of the multi-platform or the multi-cloud platform that we built, I'll focus on compute. So like I mentioned before with regard to the dashboard, we've got 3 nodes. They're labeled instances here, but they're essentially compute nodes. One in on-prem. So if I want to take a look at the local compute analysis, we can see that we've got 16 CPUs available. We can see we've got 64 gigs of memory, and it's one instance, one node. We can take a look at AWS. We've got 1 node in AWS. And we've got 1 node in GCP. If I take a look at each of these nodes by clicking on the actual widget here, I can see that they're all actually attached to the same layer 2 network that we're using to browse the master. So it's all 192.168.0. Now, in practice, the way that you would use this in combination with something like Kubernetes is just like this, right? So here we've got a multi-node cluster within Kubernetes. You can see we've got 4 nodes. We're looking at the master here, which is node 1. If I click on the node 1, you can see that the master has been deployed. The Kubernetes master has been deployed, and it is an AWS EC2 instance, right? So we can see the kernel version. We can see that it's AWS. If I want to take a look at node 3, which is a GCP instance, you can see the kernel version here is GCP. Now, all of those things are participating in the same kind of logical cluster because of JUKE. So adding nodes, really simple. So you can absolutely do it via the API. If you don't want to do it via the API, you're a point and click guy, then you can certainly click the plus sign here. We can add, and I'm going to add a host, and we'll call it that. We'll put it, now we do support multiple regions as well. So whenever you configure a cloud service platform as part of the authentication process, it asks you to enable various regions. So if there's a need, even if you're just using one cloud, like you want to just deploy this on-prem plus AWS, you can actually pull nodes from various clouds, deploy workloads into the various regions that way, again, from a single orchestration master. So we'll add that. The operation will kind of complete in the background, and you'll see that when that finishes, we'll get a little check mark next to this. I won't wait for it because it takes a couple minutes. so that's how you add a node. Adding storage is equally as simple, but the real, kind of fancy stuff that I really wanted to show off is the fact that we can actually live migrate containers between cloud providers. So if we take a look at our workloads, which is our center for identifying all the containers that are being used or running on the JUKE platform, we have a quick rundown of all the various nodes. I know I've got a couple here. These are running in GCP. Very quickly, I can select one. And again, this is really the power of JUKE. I can just click move, again, available via API as well. And if I want to move it to my AWS node, I just click move container, and off it goes. So these migrations usually take a couple minutes. And I also want to point out the fact that these are persistent containers, meaning that they are containers with a persistent volume that's been attached to them. So moving them is not as simple as just killing the container and then redeploying it into the cloud of choice. Now, that would be hard enough as it is, but really JUKE allows you to address all of these cloud resources, again, under a single umbrella, so to speak. So let's take a look at where we moved it. Looks like those operations are still working. And we'll give it a couple minutes here. In the meantime, I think I got a couple questions here. We'll wait for a few more to come in. All right, so, well, we've got a new node, and you'll see that if I go to compute, if I go to GCP, you'll see I have two instances here, two nodes. And you'll see I've got my ED GCP webcast 1, webcast 2. You'll see that they're attached to the same network. You'll see that because of the instance size or the node size, they have different memory footprints. But you'll see that we've added it to the cluster. They would be available to be added to Kubernetes separately. But again, adding nodes to the fabric, super simple. Take a look at that container. Still moving. Again, persistent volumes require some backend replication, etc. But when this completes, I'll show you that it's landed in the designated compute node. In the meantime, we'll show off the fact that, with regard to the instrumentation in the platform, you can definitely see things like CPU, memory, application usage of each of the nodes. Again, all of this information available via the API, network utilization, and just in perfect timing, you can see the container was moved. I'll go take a look at where that is. And here we've got our AWS node, and you can see here is my ED CentOS persistent container running. The IP address has not changed. Again, this is something that we think is really important for organizations looking to adopt multi-cloud in a way that really enables the portability of applications and the high availability of applications between clouds. And lastly, I kind of want to cover, and there's a lot more to kind of cover, but I think in this 30-minute webcast, I want to make sure that we give as much time and consideration as possible to some of the questions. We've got a few that are trickling in, so really excited to get to those. But lastly, I kind of want to show off the marketplace. So the marketplace is our internal registry. These are JUKE's containers. You can customize these. You can upload your own container images to this. But again, we want to make this super simple for our customers to deploy. Again, if you're already using Kubernetes and you've got a registry attached to that, you can certainly still continue to use those. But again, for our customers who are looking to do a trial, or prospects that are looking to do a trial, we try to make it as simple as possible by including all of these images for testing. So with that, I know we're a little bit early, but I do want to cover some questions. I'm checking with my team here. Are we good with
We're good with questions.
Okay. So let's start with the first questions. So first question is this one file system across all clouds? So that's exactly what it is. It is a global file system. Hopefully that answers the question. Second question is, will this work with a Cloud Connect attachment such as Equinix? So with regard to using, I'm not fully familiar with the terminology Cloud Connect attachment, but you can deploy, if you're using Equinix as a colo, or if Equinix has a service that deploys virtual machines, you can certainly deploy JUKE on top of virtual machines, on top of physical machines. There's no kind of prerequisite other than the fact that the enterprise version of the software requires a Debian or CentOS distribution for the Linux. Let's see, so another question, what on-prem will this work with? VMware, Linux, KVM, OpenStack? Well, the answer is all of the above. So the JUKE nodes themselves, again, just require Linux. The cluster can be made up of a mix of virtual machines, physical machines. The virtual machines can be provided either by VMware, KVM, OpenStack. And again, obviously, with regard to the images that we have, the JUKE images that we have available at the major cloud service providers, those would be virtual machines as well. Another question, are there Ansible modules? There are Ansible modules. Now, the JUKE platform itself is deployed via Ansible modules, but they are just kind of included with the installation script. We also include Ansible playbooks for deploying Kubernetes on top of JUKE, and we're working with partners to deliver more. And then we have another question: is this strictly containers, or will this also deploy VMs? So JUKE is a container infrastructure platform. So hopefully that answers your question. This is specifically meant for containers. This is specifically for enabling persistent container applications and then allowing them to kind of live in this multi-cloud fabric.
We got another one here asking, how does it work with Kubernetes?
So how does it work with Kubernetes? Now, the simplest answer is that JUKE essentially attaches all of the various cloud nodes to the persistent network fabric, which allows us to assign or bind local IP addresses to cloud nodes. And then Kubernetes would then just deploy the Kubernetes modules directly to those nodes. So for instance, you can see here, this is an AWS instance. It's got a 192.168.0.133, so we're actually logging into the master here. And then if I look at node 3, which is another one of the nodes in this 4-node cluster in Kubernetes, it is a GCP instance, but also bound to that same layer 2 network, so 192.168.0.110. So with regard to Kubernetes, you would still, in terms of application orchestration, deploying the pods themselves, all of that would remain the same. The real power of using Kubernetes on top of JUKE is by abstracting all the cloud resources. Kubernetes can deploy freely in a cluster without having to choose which cloud you're going to. And then later on, the power of JUKE is to provide this global file system that allows you to move containers from, stateful containers from AWS, GCP after the fact. And then there's obviously, the operational benefit of being able to scale up storage in a particular cloud if that's what makes sense, or scale up compute in a particular cloud if that makes sense, and not being bound by the traditional paradigm, which is build out a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud that you want to use it in, and then if you want to use a different cloud, building out a separate one in that cloud. So we want to really blur the lines and allow our organizations, the customers, to freely adopt various cloud platforms without having to worry about retooling or redeploying orchestration frameworks.
Another one is related to deployment of containers. Is there a way to set rules for the deployment?
Yes, there's absolutely a way to set rules. Now, what's available to us in the GUI are deployment preferences. So for instance, here I can create a deployment rule that says, let's just create a rule I can call this, ED webcast. I can say I always want to have a persistent volume, or I can say that these are ephemeral containers. If I say persistent, I can determine a storage size. I just say 1 gig, and then I can attach it to any one of the VLANs that are available via the networking module. So here I'm just going to choose the internal network. The other thing that I can do is I can say I can create a cluster. So it allows me to not only create the storage size, but determine the clustering or the round robining or the load balancing algorithm for attaching and forwarding those packets. Beyond that, you can certainly trigger the API to do all kinds of things. So for instance, if you want to say customer ABC or tenant ABC can only deploy into a certain set of nodes, and those certain set of nodes happen to be in AWS, you can certainly set that up as well.
And one more in regards to marketplace. Can we add our own images to the marketplace?
So I don't know if I'm hearing your audio, but so the last question was, can the marketplace be customized? And the answer is yes. You can upload your own images. You can customize the ones that are in there. Absolutely. All right, folks. So the last question is this going to be recorded, and can this presentation be shared? And yes, it can. I think lastly, what I'd like to do is really quickly give you guys a URL for our trial. So the trial is free. So just so that you guys are aware, we want to get JUKE out into as many hands as possible. Now, the trial allows you to create a 4-node cluster. 2 nodes would be on-prem, or at least 1 node would have to be on-prem. And then the other 3 nodes could be split between GCP and AWS. Now, obviously, you don't pay any licensing stuff for the on-prem for the trial. You would be charged for the instances themselves in AWS, unless you have an Amazon coupon that pays for EC2 instances, for instance. I think you've got the link is out there for you guys. So really quickly, if there are no more questions, it has been my pleasure to share the JUKE multi-cloud platform with you guys. I would stay tuned. Find us on Twitter, find us on LinkedIn, follow us. We will have lots and lots of more information regarding some really fun stuff that we're doing. And I'm really excited to continue sharing what we're doing with you guys. So again, you can find me on Twitter as well, at Erwin Daria, and I'll be happy to interface with you guys and answer any questions that you guys have out there in the world. Thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon. And if I don't talk to you or you don't ask me any questions, have a great weekend.